The old Clark Sandpits as part of our Hidden Lake series, and a couple of neighbors here are out casting for fish here on the south shore of the uppermost lake. They get brim here, they get some bass, and as you can see, they're popping it as lure over here.
You don't want the frog.
Were you living here when there used to be the drive-in theater over here?
Yeah, my dad was. I'm not quite that old, but I remember the drive-in when I was a kid. Seemed like. But they've been coming out here for years. My dad, and all his brothers.
Did many of your neighbors work here in the sand pits?
That I don't know. Nobody that I know of. They all work for Ryco Chemical.
Close by.
Yeah. Yeah, they growed up right over off Hollywood, off Border Street.
If you could be king for a day, what would you do with these lakes?
I would try to turn them into public access and clean them up with, make it a fine place. It's a shame that people can't come down here and enjoy it,
Do people swim down here?
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a few drownings here, but yeah. Yeah, they swim.
I'm told the water here is not that clean.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Well, I guess that's why they don't want nobody coming down here. I think for the drownings and. But I wish they would do something with it, make it accessible to the public.
It certainly is beautiful land. And it's right here in the middle of West Pensacola. You'd never know it looking around.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it. Yeah, it does look like an old oak tree, ain't it?
Welcome, friends. I'm John Singley. We're at the Hidden Lakes, the restoration of Bayou Chico. With us today is our special guest, Barbara Albrecht. Barbara is the president of the Bream Fishermen Association here in Escambia County. Barbara, thank you for coming out to the lakes with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Barbara, as we look toward the far end over here, the bluffs and the sand dunes, and the beautiful water here late in the afternoon, it makes you wonder what possible future uses could occur here. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think if we have the ability to clean up our waterways, remove the nutrients, and reduce some of the pathogens that we're getting with bacteria loading, that there is an opportunity to restore these lakes and make them into natural areas. Much like we're putting stormwater ponds and having walkways around them and natural vegetation, opportunity like that would exist here. And what's interesting about these lakes is, again, we've discussed how they are not natural, that they basically were mined and they made holes until they tapped into the groundwater.
The fish are jumping out there, I noticed.
But this lake is actually quite deep and has probably a sandy bottom given the blue-green color that we're seeing. So it might be a nice area to swim in, cool off. I mean, if I were a kid and I lived within a 2-mile radius, I would probably hop a fence to get in here and go swimming if I were growing up. It's a great way to cool off in July and August. However, the reason that this area is fenced off and the county has bought the property is because we had a few accidents in the past. A child drowned here, and I'm sure there's been other issues here. So these have been sort of off limits, and Mother Nature in her amazing way is able to heal herself and recover. Now, many of the plants that are surrounding this area are not native, but the vegetation is creating a habitat that's being used by different species. So like you commented on, there are fish in the waters. I've seen a little smallmouth bass. I've seen some gambusia. I just saw an osprey fly over. So there's a lot of different animals that would use this system. I'm sure there's a lot of nocturnal animals that use this system.
There's competing interest in the area for future use of the lakes here. And when you think about the need for greater conservation areas for birds, and particularly, could this play a role as a bird sanctuary, perhaps?
So, for instance, a lot of our smaller bayous will have wintering birds come through, rest, and move on. In the same way, in the springtime, when we have a lot of young fish and whatnot, you'll have a lot of shorebirds that need open sandy areas that will come into smaller bayous and creeks to get some of their food. So all different types of species would use this. Insects would probably be the first recruits, and once you have the insects, then you would have a lot of the birds that are insectivores. So you'll notice that we have a lot of oaks that are lining this area, not so much pine, but once upon a time, this area probably had a lot of longleaf pine, especially where you see some of the red clay deposits. They kind of go hand in hand. But today, the oaks that are dominating this area, which is disturbed, they produce the most food for birds as insects. An oak tree, a live oak, can have up to 650 species of insects that make their life on it. So if you're a bird and you're feeding your chicks a worm or a caterpillar every hour, you don't have to fly as far to find food for them. So it has...
This is it's a remarkable body of land here. And what's remarkable is, I think we're facing the south here, and over here is the north. We're really in the middle of West Pensacola, but you would hardly know it. You hear the birds, you saw the ospreys, you hear the chickens up on the ridge up there. It just looks to me like a perfect setting for a park. But again, you know, that's a decision that the community will have to make at some time as
Sure.
how best to use that. Barbara, what is the condition of Jackson Creek today, where we are?
This system is trying to recover. Much like our bodies, when we get a cut or a scrape, we heal over. And this system is in a state of recovery, but it's got a long way to go. The banks of this creek are inundated with a lot of invasive species. We have Japanese climbing fern. We have the potato vine crawling up it. We have all around this area, we have the kogon grass, and we have popcorn trees. So in that case, the surrounding uplands are not very healthy. In the water is relatively shallow. At first glance, it would look like it's maybe a foot and a half, but I promise you that if you stepped into it, you would sink up to your knees in muck. And there's also a layer of clams that are on the surface that have been opened by what I would think would maybe be raccoons.
You mean like clams you would eat?
Right.
The real clams, huh?
They're freshwater clams, and like most of the organisms that live in our creeks and streams, they are filter feeders. This creek is impaired for nutrients, but also for bacteria. And that's coming from upland, the fact that we haven't done the conversion from septic to sewer in a lot of these older neighborhoods, and the fact that we also have an awful lot of sedimentation, a lot of rainfall. But it is these important trees that form this very short riparian zone that are keeping sediments out. So when I said it was deep once upon a time, deeper than I am tall and narrow, it would have been fast moving, it would have been cooler, right now, because it's so shallow and has a dark bottom and a lot of nutrients, there's a really good chance that it's much warmer than it once was. Cooler water holds more oxygen. Sensitive species need more oxygen to survive. So to restore these systems, to restore Bayou Chico, you have to get at the source of the problem, the headwaters, follow the system down, create those buffers, potentially make berms, plant them with native vegetation, not all of these invasive species, and let there be a healthy riparian zone that shades out the creek. But if you just dredge Bayou Chico today and leave everything around Jackson Creek, Jones Creek, and Maggie's Ditch without doing any kind of buffering to the system, you can just wait a couple of weeks and it'll fill back in with sediments.
For those who are watching, Barbara, today, where would you describe the headwaters of Jackson Creek? I mean, geographically, where would that be?
So from where we are, as a crow flies, it would be to the northwest of us, and it would be up at Jackson Road, Jackson Street. And actually, the Bream Fishermen used to track this area very much because there's an old lift station up there where they had in that vicinity some sewer that they put in, but there was a little bit of leakage. And I believe the county, some of the folks like Dana Morton and whatnot, have been trying to do source tracking of where the bacteria is coming from. Now, I have to say, in my opinion, that is important, but source tracking of bacteria should be occurring in tandem with sediment input so that we can be addressing more than one problem instead of going through the whole watershed and looking at one issue and then saying, okay, we're there, now let's go back and do it all over again for another issue. I think we can be doing this a little bit smarter.
Just to our north over here, you can see how the land rises.
Yes.
And I suppose that hydrology or the flow of water, stormwater, would move toward the creek and the lakes.
So what happened, and this is very common in our area, as we built our roads and our house foundations and a number of different structures, we would mine sand and mine gravel. And we would take this mined sand and gravel and build up a foundation, mix it with our cement and concrete in order to make our buildings. Well, this particular property is co-located very close to this water body, this creek. And unfortunately, during the excavation component of the business where they were mining, somebody at some point tapped into the groundwater table. And so the groundwater filled up from the bottom. And this whole system is hydrologically connected to a system of underwater aquifer and underwater areas which come up in small creeks, much like where we're standing, and it would eventually come up in the bayou itself. And we actually have groundwater that comes up in Pensacola Bay and even offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. Most people don't realize that. So this is a three-dimensional system, but we're at the surface and we're only seeing one dimension.
So Barbara, coming back here and just seeing the wild beauty of this whole space, what do you think the impacts might be if they do put the dredge spoils back here from Bayou Chico?
Well, I don't think that that's even a possibility per se to use these lakes for dredge spoils, because frankly they're hydrologically connected to the groundwater system. So if we know that the sediments from Bayou Chico are contaminated, why would we want to take them and put them in a lake system that is hydrologically connected to our water bodies? If we have contaminated sediments, which I believe has been proven, in that case, why not take those contaminated spoils and put them in some of the socks, some of the sediment socks that we have used for some of the artificial islands in the mouth of the Escambia Bay, and let the liquids come out and maybe capture those, and utilizing plants or utilizing some new technologies, clean those up. But as far as removing sediments from a bayou and putting them in these lakes, I think we can come up with much better ideas than that.